Greetings and welcome to Calm, Clear Conversations. I'm Christopher Johnson with Calm, Clear Communications, and with me today is none other than I practice this, I promise. Organizational organizational psychologist, Dr. Gena Cox, executive coach, and author. That, that's an impressive title.
It's also a mouthful based on everything I always hear. The organizational psychologist has a lot of syllables in there, but they're all important because we are psychologists. But most people, when they think of psychologists, think of clinical. Do you love your
Mhm.
mother, Bob Newhart kind of stuff, therapy. But organizational is obviously about the human experience, human behavior in the context of organizational life, with all of the power dynamics, the communication dynamics, the politics, all of the aspects that make it not as easy as it might seem on first blush. That's what organizational psychology is about.
So, being human in or within organizations, yeah,
Mhm.
that does need its own field.
It needs many fields, right,
Oh, yeah.
Christopher? Especially, this past, well, it's a mixed blessing because in a way, I say that organizational psychology is having a bit of a heyday. But unfortunately, what has prompted that heyday is two things that are very, very negative. One is certainly have had this pandemic where everything has been disrupted. Our whole human experience has been disrupted. Therefore, our workplaces have been disrupted. Therefore, our employees, our leaders, our children, our school, everything is disrupted. So that's one of the reasons why you're hearing more about things like burnout and stress and communication. And really, leaders are trying to find new ways to deal with the new challenges. So that's one of the reasons that organizational psychology is having a heyday. The other reason organizational psychology is having a heyday, unfortunately, is that when Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed in 2020, uh, there was a whole new conversation that started to take place in American and workplaces, not just actually, it started in America, but because I have clients and friends in other countries, I know that the conversation extended beyond the United States. But what happened after those two horrific events in the year of 2020 is that people began to say, are those experiences taking place in my workplace? And there was an increased attention to the experiences of people in all their variations, people of color, people from different ethnicities,
Mhm.
people who are LGBTQ plus, people who have whether they're neurodiverse or physical disabilities, whatever those differences, those variations, as I prefer to call them, there was an improved emphasis on those, attention. So this last couple of years, organizational psychology has really had to do its job.
Yeah. Now, the area that you specialize in or you focus on is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, no. And
Okay.
that's a great question. And you probably were surprised that I said no. The area that I focus on is leader effectiveness. And the reason I'm so clear in my response to you, Christopher, in fact, this is one of the main points I make in the book that I have written that comes out in October of this year. One of the main points I make is that I don't believe that there is such a thing as diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations. I mean, they're concepts, these are things that are real. What I believe goes above those and is really what the conversation is about. And what I focus on is leader effectiveness, because the diversity, equity, and inclusion work is a subset of leader effectiveness. You cannot be an effective leader of a diverse workforce if you do not understand these ideas. And therefore, they're aspects of leadership. And of course, the whole point is that every leader should and must understand these ideas so that he or she can be effective for all employees.
Effective leadership.
That's how I
Imagine
look
that.
at it. I don't
Yeah.
want to. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals. I mean, there's a profession there. I'm not meaning to deny or downplay that, but you can see that from in terms of the emphasis of my work. My emphasis is on what the heck are these leaders doing?
Right. So if leaders are not engaging the entirety of uh, the people they are leading, then they're not really leading effectively.
in my humble opinion. And that's why I say that the thing that changed after George Floyd in particular was killed is not that we have to increase our emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And by the way, there's some people who don't even want to hear those words. And those are the people I hope I'm talking to today, but maybe not. What really needed to happen, what happened is that people began to realize that there were many managers in their organizations who were not paying attention to their full workforce, right? So I'm not even asking leaders to learn new skills. To me, to be effective, I'm not even asking you to necessarily learn new skills. You might already, strangely enough, know how to be an effective leader, but you might not be an effective leader for people who look like me, because you might not even be able to see me. You might not think about me. You might not promote me. You might not pay me fairly. You might not give me the opportunities that you give to some other people who look more like you.
Okay. And so then what are the trends that you're seeing in the workplace regarding effective leadership work?
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing some efforts in organizations to really focus on the issue that upon everybody else calls it diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Christopher, when you see that I say, yes, obviously we're going to use those words, but I don't call it that because I try to make this bigger point. And so what I see is that organizations are doing like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or maybe 2 steps forward and 3 steps back in some cases, because they're taking actions that are meant to solve for the diversity and inclusion challenge, right? That's what they're doing. And so in focusing on it in that way, they're taking actions that tend to be primarily training actions. Let's get a class on implicit bias training. Let's get a class on this. Let's get a class on that. And I see so many classes that you could spend every cent of your money, every penny of your money on implicit bias training and still not have anything at the end of it. So the more effective organizations, let's say they are focusing on training, and I will explain later why that's a problem. They are not just focusing on something like implicit bias training. Instead, they're really focusing on coaching their managers and their leaders to be effective for all of the people who fall into the circle of their authority. So the training, it's really more leadership training that includes the components of understanding the ways that people vary and understanding that human variation is normal. So I'm seeing that as, to me, that's the gold star. I don't see a lot of that going on. I see a lot of this other kind of training. And so another thing I would say is that there is nothing wrong with the increased emphasis on training that I'm seeing. Training is good. So all the trainers out there, don't cut my head off. Training is not bad. But training to accomplish what we're talking about cannot just be this one-off ad hoc kind of training that is meant to say, well, Gena, you come into the training and then you are now able to handle diversity and inclusion issues because you understand, brown people, gay people, disabled people, because that's not how humans work. Yes, it doesn't hurt. And there is some benefit that goes beyond the classroom for that kind of training. But the organizations that are doing this well are taking a more systemic and strategic approach to understanding what they need to do across the enterprise, not just to increase the number of people in these categories, more disabled people, more gay people, more straight people, more whatever kind of people, but to make sure that every one of those people is having a good experience on a day-to-day basis in their workplaces.
Okay. So it's more than just checking a box. Checking a box doesn't get you effective leadership.
Mm-hmm. No, because, we've had diversity and inclusion programs and initiatives since the 1960s. They came about primarily because the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was founded, and the EEOC implemented these requirements that would say, if you have a company, especially a company of 100 employees or more, number one, every year you were required to report to the federal government the demographic characteristics of your workforce. And then secondly, there were now these laws put into place that said an organization there could be a legal challenge brought against an organization on the basis of discrimination, a discrimination charge on the basis of discrimination on the basis of race, and all these other protected categories. That idea is nothing new. What is amazing is that between the 1960s and 2020 is that people were collecting that data and doing absolutely nothing with it. They weren't paying any attention to the demographic characteristics because they didn't have to. Nobody was watching. So there's that. And then the second piece of it was, I don't care how many people of color you hire, how many people were gay, what is their experience every day? That's the inclusion part of this conversation.
Okay.
That what organizations need to do is to look at this systemically and strategically have a plan to say, how can we make sure that everybody has these good experiences on a day-to-day basis? Inclusion then is very different than diversity, which is about counting the heads, if you would. Inclusion is about, okay, so now that I'm here, thank you very much. Are you talking to me? Are you ignoring me in the elevator or on my Zoom call? Are you paying me like you're paying everybody else? Are my performance reviews fair or are they biased? All of the ways that we can measure what is actually happening. There is a whole lot of room for organizations to improve.
And so the company culture, is that, under organizational psychology?
Mhm. So, Christopher, I'm glad you asked that question. Number one, it is definitely a part of organizational psychology, but even more importantly, it is a part of this particular conversation, because I think that you can see that what I've been leading up to or hinting at or really stating quite clearly is that I think this is a leadership challenge. And I feel the buck stops squarely in two places in corporations. It stops with the C-suite, specifically the CEO, and it stops with the board, corporate governance. So what I always want to know is, what are they doing? Because if inclusion is not led from the top of the organization, there will not be any significant outcomes that employees can see and feel. And if employees can't see and feel the outcomes, as far as they're concerned, you're not doing anything as a leader.
Okay. So then if you've checked a box and that's all you've done, it's not reflected in the company culture, it's not reflected at the board level, it's not reflected in the C-suite, then that is not a hospitable company culture.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay.
And so let me make it even more explicit. It is those folks at the top of the organization that define the culture of an organization. It is the reason why people can get away with treating some people poorly, or the reason they can get away with not promoting some people, or the reason they can get away with all of the various manifestations of discrimination and unfair treatment, is because somebody either knows at the top of the organization and doesn't care, or knows and does nothing about it even if they care, or in some cases they just don't know. And I guess maybe there's the other category of people who just don't even want to hear this conversation, because I say I look at the data I look at data indicating what are the opinions of Americans as a group, as a whole, right? And I already know that about 50% of Americans feel there's too much conversation about this so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. They don't want to hear it, right? They wish it would go away. They wish we would stop talking about it and get quiet. Well, because I know that in the general case, I know that is also true in organizations. I assume that 50% of the leaders that hear this conversation would be in that category. They would say derogatory things about, oh my God, she's talking about this diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh my gosh, she's woke. Oh my gosh. All of these words that are meant to say this is not an important conversation. But guess what? If you lead a company and your company needs talent, and your company needs talent in this country, your talent ought to be representative of the available labor force. If it is representative of the available labor force, it should be therefore diverse. And therefore, you need to understand these issues because you need to be effective in leading that workforce.
Okay. So the 50% who are in that category, how about the other 50%? Who does this well?
Yeah, I'm not going to mention too many specific companies, but I will mention Tim Ryan, who's the CEO of PwC US. And I'll mention him because Tim Ryan's influence goes beyond PwC. So within PwC US for years, he has been a leader in this conversation about what we're trying to create here. And he never claims to be perfect. I don't think any leader should. He just says, I believe this stuff matters. I'm going to talk about it every day. I'm going to take actions every day that show that I believe in it. I'm going to establish and implement policies in my organization that support that. And furthermore, I'm going to go out of PwC and I'm going to create an organization called CEO Inclusion. And I'm going to bring CEOs from other companies together. I'm going to share with them what I've learned in my work as the chairman, US chairman of PwC. I'm going to share and I'm going to encourage them to share with one another. So I'm going to scale my impact so other people can see that there are good ways to do this, and they also will lead it from the top. So I like to talk about him because when I first discovered him in 2017, I think it was at the time, I was amazed that he wasn't just saying, I believe the stuff and I want to work on it. And he was actually doing something, but he was going beyond just the direct influence of his organization and spreading the word more broadly. There are other leaders that are very effective in other organizations. I think Sodexo is an organization that has a long history of effectively working on issues, leader effectiveness issues that include the diversity, equity, and inclusion dimension. I think they have a long history of that. I've worked at IBM. I think IBM has a very long history of helping leaders be effective with that, including this dimension of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have a long history with regard to gender and race and so on. So I know that it is possible. And I think that those organizations that have been successful are the ones where the leaders, number one, are interested and want to do this and sincerely do it and are consistent. They don't do one-off stuff. They don't just celebrate Black History Month and then Pride Month and then Hispanic Heritage Month and then whatever month and think, yeah, I've done my job. They think of this as a 365 day activity, action.
And it's more than just the quote unquote 9 to 5 of the job. It goes beyond that because, well, hey, we're more than just the time we spend at work.
Yeah, Christopher, that is such an excellent observation and question, because that's one of the good things that has come out of the pandemic. You know, we don't want this pandemic. By the way, it's not done. It just, for those people who don't like wearing their masks, yes, I just made a political statement, wear a mask, because it really does seem to help. And what's happening is that it hasn't gone away, but we're all in this together. Number one, we know that. And the second thing is that the impact of the pandemic has been to show that even if I want to do the best possible job that I want, but my kids can't go to school, my spouse is sick, I'm caring for a loved one because they're not well, or I have to care for them at home because I'm afraid to let them go out into public where they would be at risk. Like, these are human things that happen, and yet I still want to do the job. And I think I think we are all more aware of that and more willing to express the things that we need and to let people know what our real experience is. Because we've had sick relatives before the pandemic. We've had kids that couldn't go to school before the pandemic. We've had these challenges of caregiving. We've not really been talking about them because we felt like talking about them would put us at a disadvantage. I think what you're pointing to, and what I agree with, is that in reality, we are just we're whole humans, and we're going to have these challenges even as we try to do our work. And anything that organizations can do to support us as whole humans tends to create a scenario where not only is the employee more happier, but more effective, and therefore the whole enterprise benefits from that.
So is the effective leadership work easier or just different in a virtual environment?
It's different, and I think it might even be harder. To be honest, I think managing people remotely or in a hybrid situation adds a degree of complexity to effective leadership. However, I think the fundamentals of what an effective leader doesn't change. And if you keep your eye on the ball of, well, what is effective leadership? Effective leadership of a team, of an enterprise, means that you're making some effort to connect with and understand this workforce. So you're not just saying you're the leader. You're saying, you're not just saying, get the job done. You're saying, get the job done, but also let me help you get the job done. And as I help you, I get to know you, I connect with you, I have some sense of understanding of the things that challenge you. I try to find the solutions to support you so that those challenges don't prevent you from doing the work. I connect with you, I make relationships and so on. Those fundamentals of effective leadership, I think if you then transfer them to hybrid work and transfer them to remote work, one of the things I learned from Dr. Misha Ann Martin at Work Human and their research is that they found that employees were much more satisfied when their immediate managers did check-ins with them during the pandemic. And what that meant was that what you can do in these kinds of environments, or what you must do, is if you do a little bit more of the individual check-in, just allocate 15 minutes to see how Christopher is doing on Tuesday morning, but do that consistently, you can have a positive outcome, even though you don't see that person every day like you did before.
True. And what you're saying is resonating with people who are watching.
Oh,
So
good.
Ziz in Metro Detroit, C-suite and corporate board governance, yes, they have a role and a responsibility to take on this task of leadership, to demonstrate, because that does,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And by the way, let's be clear, the big companies, your JP Morgan Chases, your IBMs and so on, they get it. They understand it, and they're mostly doing it, right? Because not only are they doing it, even if they don't totally agree with it, they will do it. But they agree. I mean, I see these CEOs on MSNBC all the time, and then they talk about these things. They understand them. Their challenge, if they do get it, is to make sure that it trickles down to the whole organization so that everybody gets it, every manager gets it. So there's that. And in a way, I know that I'm talking more to those, mid-market companies and smaller. A lot of those mid-market companies, they're not in the Fortune 500 necessarily. They might be smaller companies where that board might not be totally the board itself might not be diverse. That's one of the biggest challenges. How could I not say that? The boards might not be diverse, but the C-suite might not be diverse either, right? And so one of the challenges that I have observed with regard to this conversation is, I say it has to start at the top, but when the top doesn't get the issue because the top doesn't interact with people who doesn't look like them, if everybody went to the same university, if everybody studied the same MBA, if everybody grew up in a certain area, if everybody comes from a certain era in the country's history, if everybody belongs to a certain social group and so on, you might not hear these issues with the specificity to help you understand what the heck is Gena. Why is she constantly talking about this? I don't see any problem here. Well, you might not see a problem here because the people around you might not be variable, might not themselves be diverse, and they might not understand the issue, or worse, they might have an inkling. They have no idea what to do about it. And I guess the worst case scenario is they neither understand nor do they have a desire to do anything. So I always say that top level leaders have got to make sure that they're not just depending on the inner circle to help
that's
with this.
true. And a comment that we received: homogeneity sometimes causes its own issues because it's like an echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. That holds true for a lot of things. When I came to the United States, I discovered that the United States was very segregated. And let me be clear, I had read history books and I had understood the concept of segregation. I did not understand the reality of segregation until I came to this country. And I was an adult when I came here. And and it makes the point on both sides of this point about homogeneity. One of the things that segregation did was it separated people by race. I'm talking about racial segregation. And what that meant was that the people who were of one race thought they understood America because they understood their own experiences. They had no clue about the other side. And that works both ways. If you were white, if you were Black and you were segregated, you weren't interacting with people who didn't look like you. If you were Hispanic and you were segregated. So I'm not saying this is the problem that affects us all in this country. But segregation then results in segregation when people go to hire people for jobs and when they go to promote them. I'm not even always saying it is intentional. It is that if you say, fill this job, the easiest thing for a person to do is to go into their existing network and find a person who they think can do it, or a person on whom they're willing to take the risk. they're more likely to end up with someone who looks just like them, who went to the same school, who lives in the same neighborhood, because they figure, they'll say something like, well, he or she can fit in. And, fitting in
Yeah.
is whenever I hear fitting in, or, we have a family environment, my little radar goes up, because I know that sometimes those can both be code for, you look like me, you behave like me, you talk like me, you do things I do. And that isn't necessarily going to include me in that conversation.
That's true. But effective leadership, and this is, as you pointed out, this falls under that, guys. Effective leadership encompasses all of these things. Effective leadership is profitable.
Oh, absolutely. And now here's another thing I'll say, Christopher, that I absolutely hate to talk about: business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. This whole business case for diversity, equity, inclusion is okay. First of all, it is true that diversity has positive impact on things including financial outcomes, revenue, profitability, and a variety of other traditional financial business outcomes. And I can say that with such confidence because I have lists of references that where the research has been done at our very great universities in this country for decades that proves so. It is also true with regard to gender diversity, right? So there has not ever been, or there is no shortage of evidence to support the notion that diversity can have a positive effect on the outcomes that business leaders say they desire. But what is really mysterious is that even with that evidence, there was never any rush to diversify organizations until 2 years ago. And the reason for that is because I don't care about the business case. The business case is irrelevant because we're talking about the human experience. So you don't ask me about the business case when you're talking about leader effectiveness, because if Gena comes to work every day and does her job, but happens to be brown, happens to be whatever she is, happens to be have a disability of some sort, and she doesn't get supported by her manager, that's all I want to know. That is the business case. It is a human case. It is not even a moral case. It is a human case, because if Gena can't get the support to do the job to her optimal capability, guess who's missing out? You, Mr. or Mrs. Supervisor, and your team. So business case, schmizness case. It's the human experience. And I just want leaders to, if they really get to the essence of that, they'll realize, wait a minute, it is not logical to hire people into my company and then not give them the space to be the best that they could be, right? That is like, oh my gosh, that makes no business sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hey, people feel welcomed where they belong, and where they are not just tolerated but belong, where they are not seen as having to reduce themselves to show up in this environment.
Correct. Absolutely. And when we say those words, it sounds like duh, but I am fascinated, Christopher, by the fact that, unfortunately, it took the death of an American, George Floyd, for people to see this for the very first time with the clarity that I believe the situation requires. And, one can't sugarcoat this. One can't pretend it isn't so. That is just the reality. We're only 2 years into organizations writ large in this country recognizing that a significant portion of the workforce has not been supported by the very leaders that are perceived to be effective, have been perceived to be effective leaders all along.
So a question for you. As we near wrapping up this conversation, are you open to people connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and the thing is, I like connecting with people and hearing what they have to say. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name. It's Gena with an E, Genacox. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also visit my website, which is also my name, genacox.com. And if you want to learn a little bit more about some of my ideas about this particular topic, you can definitely check out my book, which is available on Amazon. And Christopher, Amazon is having Prime Day. So this is probably a good time to look for discounts on Amazon for books and different things. But you can get the book on Amazon. And I have also made available a free resource for anyone who's interested in what I call the inclusion tip sheet, which you can get from genacox.com/tip sheet.
Well, hang on for a second. Let's back up. So your book, I have to ask for, well, personal selfish reasons. Is there an audiobook and did you narrate it?
Yeah. So there is an audiobook, which I did narrate. I probably should have used you to narrate it, Christopher, since you have such a mellifluous, is that the right word, voice, and I'm no professional narrator or anything like that. But I did want to narrate my book because I wanted people to hear me say certain things with the emphasis that I thought the thing deserved. So I'm not a professional narrator, but I did narrate my ebook. There will be an ebook. There will be an ebook. I'm sorry, audiobook. I keep saying ebook. I meant audiobook. There will be an audiobook. There will be an ebook, and of course, a hard copy. These versions are all available for sale right now.
Okay. Now, in addition to this, I'm curious about what books you have read that you would recommend.
Oh my gosh, this is always one of the hardest questions because the truth is I read a lot of books. I read and then I'm like, which ones do I pick so that I don't offend people that I can't mention everybody all the time. So I'm just going to mention three, and I'm going to mention these three just because they're directly related to the conversation that we are having today. But just know that my tip sheet includes some references, by the way. I always provide references because I do think it is important for people to go to hear other ideas. But one of the books that I will mention right off the bat is a book by Deepa Purushothaman, The First, a Few, the Only. And I mention this book because it is one of the first books that I have ever read that so clearly represented the experience that I personally have had in corporate America for 20 something years, especially as someone who has been moving, who has had leadership roles. Deepa Purushothaman. Another book that I feel very strongly about as an opportunity for leaders to understand and for people who want them to help themselves to be the best that they can be, people who might have felt like they haven't been included, but want to do what they can do to make sure that they're optimizing their capabilities. I would definitely recommend that they read Shelley Archambault's Unapologetically Ambitious. This is one of the books I keep on my bookshelf all the time. It's behind me as we speak, as is Deepa's book. This is a book about how to set your goals and be very purposeful about achieving them. So anybody can benefit from this book, but it is related to this conversation because Shelley Archambault is herself one of the first Black women CEOs of a tech company in Silicon Valley. She has had the whole experience. And so when she gives advice, I think it's really founded on being smart about one's career. And then for a person who might be really just wanting to dig into the nuances specific to the conversation about inclusion and diversity with all of the sociological aspects of that, I always recommend The Conversation, which is a book that came out last year. And right as I'm saying that, the author's name is like falling out of my head, even though I can see this book and it's right behind me. The book is called The Conversation. Robert Livingston is the author because my brain just kicked back in. These are three books I would recommend.
All right. And, I will add one to that because it occurred to me during the conversation. It is Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us. I thought that was,
Heather.
Yeah, go on.
Oh no, I would absolutely second Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us. It was a Porchlight Award winner last year it was a top winner. It deserved to be. That book is these are books, that book and The Conversation, that go beyond the category of just understanding facts about this experience, but to really the nuances, and also make the critical point that we're in this together. This is all about America. This is not about just one group of people in America. This is about the American experience. And Christopher, if you wouldn't mind indulging me for the benefit of those who don't know this, let me just quickly say that my book, Leading Inclusion, is really about all of this. and it's specifically written for that leadership audience that especially at the top, for executives and board directors and those who want to understand the issue from the top of the pyramid. That is what my book is about.
Good. And yep, I have just placed that into the chat or the comments. All of these are great books. And, you know, my reading list is inexhaustible. It is never ending.
Yes.
And I'm guessing that yours is as well.
Yeah, no, I really, really enjoy books. And I have to say, even though I own a Kindle and I own a tablet, I don't think that there's anything that is a substitute for like picking up a book and feeling it in your hands and touching it and underlining pages and all of that. I'm one of those. So nothing against the technology because I do consume some books that way, but I love touching books. And then once I find books that I really value, I tend to not let them go.
I understand completely. And, there is one of the things I love about books is the ability to hand them down. So I have books that my parents had. I
Oh,
see
that's
where
cool.
they made notes in the margins. Uh, and, yeah, that makes a difference. It connects it to me in a different way or more than just the book.
Mhm. May I ask you a question then?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, and one of the
Yeah.
things I'm really interested in is how do people find their books? So do you have any memory of how you first heard about that book or any of the other books that are your favorites?
Uh, it is usually NPR. So I listen to a lot of NPR. And I heard mention of this book, and then I started hearing mention of this book in a lot of other places. And I saw interviews, and I put it on my list, and then I read it, and it's like, wow, okay. And other authors had recommended this book. Isabel Wilkerson, her books, The Warmth of Other Suns and Cast, she talked about Heather McGhee. And okay, wait, I've read both of Isabel's books and they were phenomenal. I've got to read Heather's.
Oh,
And yeah,
that's great. That's
Ashley C.
great.
Ford, Somebody's Daughter, um, Clint Smith, How the Word is Passed,
Mhm.
all just wonderful books that expand ideas and give you different frames of reference.
So what I'm getting out of this conversation, and what every other listener is getting out, is that you're creating a bookshelf right here, a bookshelf moment, because I know there's so many other books that you like, but just the books that you mentioned, I hope I was nodding as you were speaking, and I probably was because I have read all of those books as well. And these are books that are related to the conversation that we've been having. But we read, I'm sure, like you are like me, we read a variety of things because I think the advantage of reading is that it helps you to get an understanding of, I call, again, this is America. So sometimes it's a book that's very specific to the topic we're talking about, but it might not be that. Like some of my favorite music is music that comes out of Appalachia. And I also like blues and funk and jazz and all the other stuff. But some of the music that comes out of Appalachia it helps me to understand the experience of people who don't look like me, might not think they have anything in common with me, but what they have in common and what they have in common with every American is that each of us wakes up every day and all we want is we wish the best for ourselves. We wish the best for our children, our loved ones. We wish the best for our neighbors. We go out, we work hard, and then we come home. We just want to relax, be in our little zone of peace, and then we can do anything the next day. It is when you don't have that experience. So like I was saying about the music of Appalachia or the stories of Appalachia, they resonate for a group of people from whom don't feel like they always have all the peace that they need or all the resources that they might need. This is America, so we have a lot of richness. We also have a lot of need. And I think anything that when we read beyond, this is an example. If we read books that go beyond the things that we're already familiar with, it tends to really enhance our lives.
Absolutely. And so the music comment, you reminded me, Bela Fleck had a birthday the other
Mm.
day. And his banjo music, I mean,
Yeah.
he is phenomenal. And I'm a big Bela Fleck fan.
Are you? Yeah.
Of course. I mean,
Yeah.
the way he find his music, listen to it, enjoy it. Um, Also on a music tangent, and since I'm in Detroit, if you are not familiar with the work of Jay Dilla, I
Mhm.
would really recommend Dilla Time by Dan Charnas.
Okay.
And it charts how he influenced music.
Yeah,
Uh,
I will definitely I will definitely check that out, and maybe you can put that in the chat. You know,
Absolutely.
the other thing, Christopher, I will say before we leave this subject is since I did mention that my love of of music from Appalachia, I was remiss in that I didn't mention my favorite musician. And you know, I like references so that you can go follow up. So let me just say that Iris Dement, without question, is the
Oh,
person I have in mind when I
yeah.
made that comment. People who love me and who go to concerts with me say, how do you listen to this? What is this? Why do you like this music? And I say, you know what? I can't even tell you why I like this music. All I can tell you is that when Iris Dement begins to sing, it takes me away. So, and again, you would probably not think of Iris Dement as the person who's likely to be on. I like Earth, Wind, and Fire too. Can't leave out Earth, Wind, and Fire. But Iris Dement, you know, and
Yeah.
again, the point I think we're both making here, Christopher, is that, and some people who are listening to this are wondering why are Christopher and Gena even talking about this? This is a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it should be about the processes and the rules and the procedures. And clearly, you know, I think what we're articulating here is that all of this stuff matters because it has to do with connection and understanding of people, especially people whose experiences may not be your own. So when I think about the music, that's where it fits in.
And yes, Iris Dement. And if you mention Iris, then I have to mention John Prine.
I knew you were going to say that.
Oh, well,
Yes,
I mean, they go,
together.
yeah.
Yeah, who
It is a
unfortunately
wonderful
passed away a
mix.
few years ago, in fact,
Yeah,
during the pandemic because
yeah.
of the pandemic. Um, but what these two people also had in common, Christopher, beyond this, the music and the musicality and the lyric, was they both had, I think the core thing they had in common was they wanted America to be great. And they were always talking about the experience of people who were at the bottom of the pile and how it is important to understand, first of all, that there are people there and to see those people and to lend them a helping hand and to create community and all of that stuff. That's what John Prine and Iris Dement were all about. It relates to this conversation, folks. You know,
Absolutely.
bear with us.
Well, no, I mean, it's all connected because
It
these
is.
are expressions of art. And hey, art is one of those things that connects us, that helps us share our humanity and recognize our humanity in one another.
Yeah, because you made the point that that is really what the difference is in the conversations about leadership these days. And yeah, and thank you for bringing home that point, Christopher, because in fact, this conversation started very sort of businessy. We're talking about the business and stuff, as it should. That's what we were. That's the primary focus. But this part of the conversation is also very relevant because if a person says, "Well, why are you talking about that at work?" or in, you know, what does that have to do with your job? What this has to do with is exactly what you just mentioned, the humanization of the workplace and the experience of the people in it. If you know now that Christopher likes Bella Fleck and Iris Dement, and you manage Christopher, you have one more connection point. But if you manage Christopher and you have never talked to him about anything except TEDx narrations and ebooks and all the things he does to do the job, you don't know Christopher, and you're probably not going to be as effective in leading him or getting him to be helping him to be his best. So it's always good to know a little bit more beyond just the core stuff.
Absolutely. We are connected and we should be.
Absolutely.
Dr. Gena Cox, thank you so much for this fabulous conversation.
Christopher, when you invited me, I knew I would absolutely say yes because I met you when just for the sake of the audience. I didn't know, haven't known Christopher that long, but from the minute I met him, I respected him, and I thought if he ever invites me on his show, I will make sure that I do it just because I'm very thrilled to have any opportunity to support him because he does such excellent work.
Thank you. Interested in learning more about any of the items that you've seen in today's session? Leave a comment below. Interested in being a guest? Leave a comment below. I help event planners and organizers produce virtual events. Learn how I can support your virtual event by connecting or leaving a comment. Thanks for watching.